In at number 10, we have the Spino. And this is a creature which I think is an extremely underrated one. And it often gets forgotten about in most lists of some great art carnivores. And I know this isn't a great art carnivores list. This is the best late game island tames. Doesn't also mean that they have to be tamed in the late game. I am slightly twisting the definitions around a bit. But there's only really one creature which kind of falls into that slot because it's technically really a mid-game creature. But there are so many creatures you can include on this list. But the Spino, in my opinion, had to be one of them. It is extremely mobile. Obviously spawns on the island. That is a requirement for it to be on the best late game, the island tames. They do have to spawn on the map. And the fact with its mobility that allows it to spin 360 degrees on the spot, like, the Rex couldn't do that. Like, nothing could make the Rex do that. And also, they're really great in the water as well, and they have the hydration buff. And someone said recently that I accidentally said the Spinos had the bleed ability. If I ever said that, I am sorry. I didn't mean it. They do not have the bleed ability, but Rexes don't have the bleed ability either. So, you know. And actually, overall, these things do a little bit more damage than Rexes. And back in the day, like 2016, 2015 arc, they were seen as more powerful than Rexes. Like, the Spino was just a bigger, more powerful carnivore, whereas the Rexes kind of taken all of the scene nowadays, and these things are pretty much forgotten about. And they can even go on their hind legs too. That was part of the TLC update that they had at some point, allowing them to deal even more damage. And they're really great carnivores, so I simply had to include them on this list. And I really hope that you agree with me on this one. Next up, we've got the Giga, and since this is an extinction, I can't put these things so high on the list, as for the islands you simply don't need this kind of creature, but I have to put it on here. Come on, the best late games of the island in terms of tames, the Giga, the Tiny Tim, has to be on here. It's an absolute beast, packing loads of damage, but the reason why I say you don't need it is it isn't allowed into boss fights on the island. The Rex is pretty much as powerful as you can get, really, for boss creatures on the island. And I know that's a really, really huge generalization, but, you know, we'll just go along with it. Either way, the Giga can't be allowed into boss fights, so it has no boss use. If this was Extinction, however, I'll put these things so high on the list. Like, man, they are so useful on that map. But they are still useful for gathering resources on the island, like hide and meat and all of that. And they're just really fun to ride on, to be honest. That's another great benefit. They are huge. The only real downsides being their terrible stamina and their rage meter, so it kind of gives them a percentage of their own health, so they don't technically have their true amount of health. Still, I had to include it on the list. Come on, it is the Giga. Next up, following the huge carnivore trend, we have the Carcharodontosaurus, and this is kind of here for a similar reason. It's a big carnivore that deals a hell of a lot of damage, and it spawns where the Giga would spawn, and it's essentially just the Giga, but a little bit better in my eyes, so that's why it's slightly better on the list. It comes in at the number 8 spot instead of the number 9 spot. But the overall premise of the creature is pretty much the same. Again, big carnivore, deals loads of damage. It does all the same stuff. Yes, it has a blood rage, which allows it to do more damage than the Giga when full. And it doesn't have a rage meter, so it has its full health rather than the percentage of its health. And on top of that, its stamina isn't the most atrocious thing you've ever seen. They are pretty much the same thing, and I'm demonstrating its stamina leveling here, which isn't awful, but don't do that. Don't put all your levels into stamina on this thing. That is not what you want to be doing with this creature. Honestly, don't go near the stamina stat. Just leave it as it is. It is alright. It is fine. It is so much better than the Gigas, but if you really need it, get a stamina mutation. And although I would advise you tame one of these things on Ragnarok, they can still be tamed on the island. I do have a taming guide video if you want to check that out. If I remember, there'll be a card at the top of the video. If not, there'll be nothing. Right, in at number 7, we have got the Rhyniognatha, and I had to put this thing here. Come on, this thing can literally pick up Rexes. It does have to be warranted as one of the best late game the island creatures. And what a late game creature this is. Honestly, it's absurd, like its tame method and all of that. It only spawns on the islands under Lost Island, actually. And in normal, I'm still going to call it normal Arc really, because ASA hasn't normalized itself in the Arc community. It's pretty much half and half, I think, at the moment, if the numbers are to be right, because ASA frankly is too expensive, and on most things it doesn't run very well. On the consoles though, if you do get ASA on a console, you'll be fine with it. It will be a perfect experience for that console and it will work. But on PC, I'm literally buying a 3090, which at the time of me recording this video is a £650 used card, let alone its price new, just to play a dinosaur game. But thanks to you guys, all of you watching these videos out there, I've actually been able to afford a card like that for my own personal rig. Currently, I still have the 2060 Super in it, but soon, in about should be maybe 2 weeks from now, I'll have a 3090 in this thing, and then going on later in the year, I'm going to go for a 3950X and get some more RAM, because 16 gigs isn't really enough anymore, especially for ASA. It does actually recommend 32 gigs of the stuff. Also, if you noticed here, I've been with the B-roll, I should have said, sorry, cancel my last point there. I've got technology stuff in my mind. Either way, the B-roll there has been showing you how to tame one, which is from my video of how to tame one. Again, if I remember, I will leave a card. If not, there won't be a card there, and you just have to look up Rhyniognatha. But the tame method for the Rhyniognatha is pretty much an exact copy of the Reaper taming method, so if you know that, then you'll be fine. But there's just a couple of extra steps, but it's not too complicated, but definitely is a late game tame because you're going to need a lot of resources for it, especially if you want 100% effectiveness. Next up, we've got the Yutyrannus, and this creature is one of those tames where I don't feel right if I have not tamed this thing on the island, and it's so essential for any kind of boss fights. I had to put it on this list. It has to be here, okay? This is the Yutyrannus. It gives that buff to all of your creatures with the courage roar in the boss fight, and paired with a Daedon, it really does work. Although I found the Daedon isn't the most essential nowadays, and actually I have done quite a few things without the Daedon. I've just paid more attention and put my health into my Rexes or whatever boss creature I'm using. I admit a Daedon is helpful, so that is why I'm giving it a small mention here, although it is not making this list of the best late game Arc tames. And actually, towards the late game, it does become a lot more boss orientated, and you'll see that with the next 4 or so creatures. But actually, the creature in at number 1 is not boss orientated at all, and I wonder if you can guess it. If you do guess it before the number 1 slot, then put a time pin down from when you actually guessed what that creature is. Right, now at number 5 is the Baryonyx. Almost couldn't say 5 there. And luckily, now we have got all my personal life out of the way and all my tech life out of the way. We can now focus more on the dinosaurs, as I'm sure you don't need a full lecture right now on my life story. Either way, the Baryonyx is a pretty easy tame for it to be making this list, and it is the second easiest, I would say, on the list. The creature in at number 1, I'm going to give you another clue there, it is the easiest tame. The second easiest tame is at number 1. It's a very simple knockout tame, spawns in the swamp biome. I think you can find it in some other places as well. Definitely can, not just in the swamp biome. But if you really want to guarantee finding one, just head there. Make sure to avoid swamp fever. Either way, they're the best caving creature on the island, which is why I put them in this list. And they have a right click spin attack, which can stun creatures up to the size of a Megalodon, which makes them pretty useful for underwater caves as well. And I know you can use Sarcos and Basilos and all of that, but for me, the Barry does everything, and that is why I use it. Apart from the artifacts of the Skylord, that cave is far too tiny for pretty much any creature to fit in, unless you have a dung beetle for caving for some reason. Next up, we've got the Megatherium, and this is here for the chitin gathering, but mainly because of its insanity against the Broodmother boss fight on the island, and obviously that is why it has made the list, and that is why it is here. It is the best creature on the island for defeating the Broodmother, as it sort of gets a rage buff, you could kind of call it. Not in the case of what the Giga has, or It's very similar to the Carcharodontosaurus's Blood Rage, although doesn't really involve blood, and a sort of alpha buff glow to it, and essentially once it's killed an insect, it will deal absurd damage to just everything, and I think there's a 500-second time or something like that. But considering the broodmother constantly spawns spider minions at you, pretty stupid of it, I know, they will constantly replenish that buff, so that buff will always be active, and in the presence of a Yuty buffing them even further, you can have yourself a pretty insane army against insects, as I think it gives them damage, and then obviously some damage reduction on top of that as well. And again, you're going to get a lot of chitin from that broodmother boss fight, so I guess if you want loads of chitin instead of going to the insect cave, just do the gamma broodmother a lot, or you can do the alpha broodmother or the beta one. It doesn't really matter. Any broodmother stage will work perfectly with this thing. No issues at all. They are the go-to for the broodmother, which is obviously why I've had to put them on this list. And in a second you'll see what that buff looks like, and you know, maybe you can see what I mean by it looks alpha buff like. In at number 3 we have the Theri, and this creature had to be in here. Firstly because its saddle is unlocked at level 69.
Nice.
I know, that is a very nice one. Obviously makes this thing the perfect art creature. There is nothing better than it. But the reason for this creature being on the list is firstly its gathering abilities. This thing is insane at gathering all things fiber, wood, thatch, meat, hide, and you can't gather rocks, so I won't bother talking about those. And in my opinion, it's kind of more useful than you say an Anki and a Dodic, but I will give them a small mention here for gathering. They're not on this list, by the way. But the creature unit number 1 is extremely useful with a creature like the Anki and the Dodic. Have you got it yet? Have you not? Either way, the other use for this creature is that it is the best creature on the island for the dragon boss fight. The only downside being it's a herbivore, so for it to heal quickly, you will need sweet vegetable cake. This is where I would say a Daeton is very necessary to make sure these things stay alive during the boss fight, as then they can actually heal up quite quickly and effectively, because they don't have the ease of meat. The sweet vegetable cake is particularly expensive, and you probably can't get thousands and thousands of it, just like you would get thousands and thousands of meat. But the reason why they're so good at the dragon boss fight is the dragon has a particular buff or debuff for carnivores with its inflamed fire buff, whereas this thing's a herbivore, so it doesn't get that. In at number 2 we have the Rex, and I had to include this thing on the list. I'm not going to put it in at the number 1. By now you probably should be able to tell where's in the number 1 spot. Again, comment down that time code once you figured out what the number 1 creature is. But either way, this creature, the Rex obviously, is the go-to creature for any kind of boss fight. Yes, it does have a slight debuff in the dragon boss fight, and it doesn't have the buff the Megatherium has in the broodmother boss fight. It still works for all of them, although I would mainly use it for the Megapithecus because that's the only other one. But actually, nowadays, I kind of tend to use Spinos more for that boss fight because they tend to not fall into the absolute death hole that's there in the arena, which is pretty annoying. But, you know, you can get around it easily with Rexes. It just, they tend to get stuck a little bit more, which is why I don't really like them for that. But there is no denying they are a really great boss creature, and with how easy they are to tame on ASA, it just has to be in at the number 2 spot. And it doesn't. I can't even speak anymore. Either way, it doesn't deserve any less, in my opinion, or any more. But before we get into the number 1 spots, just a quick honorable mentions. The Aloe is a pretty good boss creature. The Megalosaurus does definitely pack a punch as well. Creatures like the Sarco are pretty great water tames, although maybe not in the late game. You could still say they do definitely pack a punch. The Basilo is a great option for underwater caving in the late stages of the game, and a creature like a Thyla is always very nice to hand. But let's get into the tame in at number 1. In at number 1 we have the Argentavis. Have you guessed it now, by the way? 1433, it should be the latest that you've guessed what this creature is. Either way, this, in my opinion, is the best Arc late game tame for the island. It is just such a useful flyer for traveling from A to B. With Cryopods you can travel with any creatures which you want, and it is always my go-to flyer. And if flyer speed leveling was still a thing, then maybe I would go for a Quetz, but they are so slow, and also I still prefer the Argy in a lot of ways. Although it can't pick up as much as a Quetzal, it is faster than the Quetzal, and it has weight reduction on many resources like metal, crystal, and obsidian, making it a go-to for all of that metal farming. And metal is an essential resource in Arc Ready. To actually complete it, you'll want at least some flat gear, and you'll probably want a pump action shotgun, and obviously metal tools so you can make your gathering process as efficient as possible. And when paired with an Anki and a Dodic, you have yourself an even better creature. And they are so easy to tame. They're suddenly being unlocked at level 68. Yes, just one off the perfect level. At least I'm pretty sure it's 68. It's either 68 or 62. It is somewhere in the 60 range, but before level 69, obviously. But yes, in my opinion, the Argy is the best. Its saddle also acts as a portable smithy, and it has a really nice regen buff too. You really can't live on the island without an Argy in my opinion. But anyway, that is the end of today's video, and I want to know down in the comments below also when you figured out that the Argy was in at number 1 and your favourite late game tame for the island, and did you agree with this list also? And I will see you all later.